Have you ever been treated like a criminal just for refusing to move your car parked on your own land? The sound of police sirens tore through the Alpine Ridge air at 9:47 a.m. on a Sunday morning. I had just opened my front door when two patrol cars came barreling down my private driveway, red and blue lights sweeping across my house like I had just robbed a bank. I stood on my porch, watching Patricia Cunningham, the HOA queen who had ruled unchallenged for 8 years, her voice shaking as she pointed at me and told the two officers, "He refuses to comply. He's threatening community order." Behind me, my yellow Lamborghini Urus sat motionless on the concrete, 40 feet from the public street, on the land I had surveyed 3 times to be certain. It turned out my crime wasn't breaking the law. It refused to disappear when she gave the order. The first officer, Deputy Travis Kowalski, was a tall guy in his mid-40s with the kind of tired eyes that said he had seen this exact brand of neighborhood drama too many times. He walked toward me with his partner, Officer Jamie Brennan, a younger woman who looked like she was already regretting this call. Deputy Kowalski glanced at my Lamborghini, then back at me. "Sir, are you Marcus Donovan?" I nodded. "Yes, that's me. What seems to be the problem?" He pulled out a small notepad. "We received a 911 call reporting that you're parking a vehicle illegally on HOA property and blocking access." I looked past him at Patricia, who was standing next to her silver Mercedes E-Class, arms crossed, her face flushed red. She was wearing a gray blazer that looked like it cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. I kept my voice calm. "Officer, that's my car. It's parked on my driveway. This is private property." Patricia stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly. "That's a lie. This entire subdivision is under HOA jurisdiction. He violates our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. He's parking a commercial vehicle in a residential zone." I almost laughed. "Commercial vehicle? My Lamborghini Urus, which I bought with money I made after exiting my cybersecurity startup 3 years ago, was now apparently a delivery truck." Deputy Kowalski held up a hand to Patricia. "Ma'am, let me handle this." He turned back to me. "Mr. Donovan, do you have documentation proving this property is yours?" I had been waiting for this question. I walked inside, grabbed the folder I kept on my kitchen counter for exactly this kind of moment, and came back out. Inside were my property deed and county survey reports. I handed them to Deputy Kowalski. He flipped through the pages slowly, his eyes scanning the legal descriptions and boundary lines. Officer Brennan leaned over his shoulder, reading along. Deputy Kowalski looked up at me. "According to this, your property line ends here." He pointed at the edge of my driveway. "This land was never incorporated into the Alpine Ridge subdivision when it was established in 1987. The HOA has no jurisdiction." Patricia's face went from red to something closer to purple, but she said nothing. Her jaw clenched tight, and I could see a vein pulsing at her temple. Deputy Kowalski turned to her, and I could see the exhaustion in his expression. "Ma'am, the county records are clear. This property is outside the HOA boundary." Officer Brennan finally spoke up, her voice flat. "Ma'am, parking a car on private property is not a crime." Patricia's hands were shaking now, gripping the strap of her purse like she was trying to strangle it. She turned to Deputy Kowalski, her voice tight. "This is the 3rd time this month I've had to call you people about issues in this neighborhood. I am the HOA president. I have a responsibility to maintain order." Deputy Kowalski's tone shifted. "Mrs. Cunningham, I need to remind you that misuse of 911 is a Class B misdemeanor under Texas Penal Code Section 42.06. Calling emergency services for a non-emergency can result in fines up to $2,000 and up to 180 days in jail." Patricia's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Deputy Kowalski handed my folder back to me. "Sir, you're free to go. Sorry for the inconvenience." I nodded. "Thank you, Deputy." As the two officers walked back to their patrol cars, Patricia stood frozen on the driveway, staring at me with a look that could peel paint off a wall. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, folder in hand, watching her. The patrol cars backed out slowly, lights still spinning, and then they were gone. The street went quiet again. Patricia didn't move for a long moment. Then she turned on her heel and walked back to her Mercedes. Before she got in, she looked over her shoulder one more time. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low and sharp. Then she drove off, tires crunching on the gravel. I stood there for a moment, looking at my Lamborghini. The morning sun was hitting the yellow paint just right, making it glow like a piece of polished gold. On the dashboard, I could see the small red light blinking, my dash cam. It had been recording the entire time. I walked back into the house and set the folder down on the kitchen counter. My hands were steady, but my mind was already running through scenarios. I'm not the kind of guy who picks fights. I spent most of my career building systems, solving problems, and thinking 3 steps ahead. But I know people, and I know power. Patricia Cunningham wasn't upset because I parked a car. She was upset because I didn't ask permission. That's the thing about small-time power. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. What matters is whether you bend. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. I typed in the date, the time, and a quick summary of what had just happened. Then I added a reminder to request the 911 call recording under the Texas Public Information Act. It would take 72 hours, but it was public record. I wanted to hear exactly what Patricia had said when she called the cops on me, because something told me this wasn't about a car. This was about control, and I had just told her no. I looked out the kitchen window. Across the street, my neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy Hale, was standing behind her curtain, watching. She was a 67-year-old widow who had lived in Alpine Ridge for 12 years. When she saw me looking, she quickly stepped back, letting the curtain fall. I made a mental note to talk to her later. If Patricia had been pulling this kind of thing for 8 years, I wasn't the first person she had targeted. I just might be the first person who didn't fold. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at the kitchen table. My Lamborghini Urus was still sitting outside, bright and yellow and completely legal. But I had a feeling that the next few weeks were going to be anything but quiet. Patricia Cunningham had just fired the first shot, and she had no idea who she was dealing with. Because I didn't just buy this house, I bought freedom, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that away. Not even an HOA queen with a god complex and a vendetta. This wasn't just about a car anymore. This was about drawing a line, and I was very good at drawing lines. By Monday afternoon, I had already started building my case. People like Patricia don't walk away, they double down. I opened my laptop and pulled up the Texas Property Code. Double-checked the statutes on HOA authority and misuse of 911, which is a Class B misdemeanor. Then filed the public records request for the call recording. It would take 72 hours, but I wanted to hear exactly what Patricia had said when she reported me. The rest of the day I spent doing what I do best, turning chaos into data. I mapped out every interaction, time-stamped every detail, and saved everything to the cloud. If this was going to escalate, I wanted a paper trail that could survive a hurricane. By Tuesday morning, I had another piece of the puzzle. I was outside washing my Lamborghini when Mrs. Dorothy Hale walked over from across the street. She was carrying a small basket of muffins, glancing around like she was afraid someone might hear. "Mr. Donovan," she said softly, "I wanted to apologize for what happened Sunday. Patricia can be difficult." I wiped my hands on a towel and smiled. "You don't need to apologize, Mrs. Hale. You didn't do anything wrong." She hesitated, then pressed the basket into my hands, her fingers still dusted with flour. Her voice dropped to a rasp. "I know. But I wanted you to know you're not the first. Last year, she fined me $500 because I planted red tulips instead of yellow ones. She said it violated the community aesthetic guidelines." I stopped wiping. $500 for flowers. Mrs. Hale nodded, her hands gripping the basket edge like it was the only thing holding her steady. "I couldn't afford to fight it. I'm on a fixed income. So I paid the fine and replanted the tulips. Yellow ones this time." I felt something cold settle in my chest. $500 for tulips. That wasn't about maintaining standards. That was about control. I looked at Mrs. Hale, really looked at her, and I saw something I recognized: fear. She was afraid of Patricia, afraid of what would happen if she stepped out of line. "Mrs. Hale," I said gently, "how many other people has she done this to?" She glanced around again, then whispered, "A lot. There's Jason Webb down the street. She fined him $1,200 last year because he painted his house the wrong shade of white. He had an expert do a color match, but Patricia said it was off-white instead of cream. He couldn't afford a lawyer, so he just paid it." I made a mental note. Jason Webb, $1,200, wrong shade of white. This felt like a pattern, and I had the paperwork to prove it. Mrs. Hale handed me the muffins and whispered, "Just be careful, Mr. Donovan. Patricia doesn't like it when people say no to her. I took the basket and thanked her. As she walked back to her house, I stood there thinking. I cross-checked HOA minutes, fine notices, and Mrs. Hale's account to estimate roughly 24 fines totaling nearly $50,000 over 18 months. And nobody had fought back. That afternoon, I went to the county clerk's office and pulled the public property records for Alpine Ridge and the surrounding area. 2 hours of digging through zoning applications later, I found it. Alpine Ridge Development LLC had filed for a luxury townhome project, 118 units, high-end and expensive, and the proposed site sat right next to my property. The development required 3 parcels, the 2.3-acre vacant lot, my 1.8 acres, and Mrs. Dorothy Hale's 0.9 acres. And then I saw the name that made everything click. Cunningham Realty Holdings, LLC. Registered agent Patricia Cunningham. She wasn't just the HOA president. She was a silent partner in a real estate deal that stood to make millions. If she could pressure me and Mrs. Hale into selling at below-market prices, she could flip them to Alpine Ridge Development for a massive profit. The math was simple. Buy 3 parcels for roughly $1.4 million in distressed sales. Sell them to the developer for $5.6 million. Net profit $4.2 million. And the easiest way to create a distressed sale. Make life so miserable for the property owners that they give up and leave. I printed the documents, put them in a folder, and walked out of the county clerk's office. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Patricia. The subject line read, "Courtesy notice." I opened it. The message was short and cold. "Mr. Donovan, your luxury vehicle creates a visual disruption to neighborhood harmony. Please consider relocating it to your garage or rear parking area. Respectfully, Alpine Ridge HOA Board." I read it twice. Then I replied. I kept my tone professional, but I made sure every word was legally airtight. "Mrs. Cunningham, as confirmed by Deputy Kowalski on April 23rd, my property is not under HOA jurisdiction. Further harassment will be documented and may result in legal action. Respectfully, Marcus Donovan." I hit send. Then I forwarded the email to myself 3 times, saved it to the cloud, and printed a hard copy. Because I had a feeling this was just the beginning. Patricia Cunningham thought she was dealing with someone who would roll over, someone who would get tired, frustrated, and eventually just sell, but she didn't know who I was. I'd built a cybersecurity company. I knew how to find leverage. Patricia Cunningham had just made her first mistake. She had shown me her hand. Now it was my turn to play. This wasn't about a car anymore. This was about $4.2 million, and I was going to make sure she never saw a penny of it. 72 hours after Patricia called 911, I received the recording. At 9:14 a.m. on Thursday, the Public Information Act file arrived. I listened once, noted the timestamps, and secured copies in multiple locations: my laptop, an external drive, 2 cloud accounts, and an encrypted USB. I recorded the audio file's metadata, timestamp, and file hash, and saved a certified copy to prove authenticity if needed. Patricia's voice came through crystal clear, high-pitched, and insistent. "I need the police immediately. A man is trespassing on HOA property with an exotic vehicle, blocking access." The dispatcher's voice was calm, almost bored. "Ma'am, is anyone in immediate danger?" Patricia's tone sharpened. "He's creating a hostile environment. This is an emergency." The dispatcher paused. "Ma'am, a vehicle parking dispute is not an emergency. I can send an officer for a civil matter." Then Patricia's voice went up an octave. "I am the HOA president. This is an emergency. Send someone now." This wasn't just evidence. This was ammunition. The next step was straightforward. I contacted the law office of Brennan and Associates, a local firm that specializes in property disputes and HOA conflicts. The retainer was $5,000, which I paid without hesitation. Within 48 hours, my attorney, Michael Brennan, had drafted a cease and desist letter. It was polite, professional, and razor-sharp. The letter outlined 3 key points. First, my property at 1847 Ridgemont Drive was not within HOA jurisdiction per county survey number TX-2024-9847. Second, Patricia's 911 call on April 23rd constituted misuse of emergency services under Texas Penal Code Section 42.06. Third, her ongoing harassment campaign was documented and actionable under civil law. The letter concluded with a simple demand: cease all contact regarding my property or face legal action. Michael sent it via certified mail. Return receipt requested. Patricia signed for it on a Tuesday afternoon at 3:37 p.m. I know because I got the notification. I expected her to back off. That would have been the smart move. But Patricia Cunningham didn't get to be HOA president for 8 years by being smart. She got there by being stubborn. 2 days after receiving the cease and desist, I found an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was an official-looking document on Alpine Ridge HOA letterhead. The title read, Official HOA Violation Notice. I scanned the contents. According to Patricia, I was in violation of community standards for displaying an unauthorized commercial vehicle. The fine was $500. If I did not comply within 14 days, the penalty would increase to $100 per day. The notice concluded with a threat failure to comply would result in a lien on my property. I read it twice. Then I smiled, because Patricia had just handed me exactly what I needed. She had put her harassment in writing, on official HOA letterhead, after receiving a legal warning to stop. This wasn't just a mistake. This was evidence of malicious intent. I called Michael Brennan immediately. He read the notice over the phone, and I could hear him typing notes in the background. Marcus, he said finally, this is good for us. She's doubling down after receiving legal notice. That shows a pattern of intentional harassment. We can use this. I asked him what the next step should be. Michael didn't hesitate. We go public, not in court, not yet, but we make sure the community knows what's happening. HOA boards operate in the shadows. They rely on people being too afraid or too tired to fight back. If we shine a light on this, Patricia loses her power. I thought about Mrs. Dorothy Hale, about Jason Webb, about the 24 families who had paid fines rather than fight. Michael was right. Patricia's power came from isolation. She picked people off one by one, made them feel like they were alone. But if I could show the community that she was targeting multiple people, that she had a financial motive, that she was breaking the law, then the whole system would collapse. I told Michael to move forward. He said he would start putting together a public evidence package, documents, recordings, timelines, everything we had. That night, I sat down at my kitchen table and began compiling my own evidence package. I organized everything into a single inventory, labeled for clarity and legal readability. Exhibit A dashcam video, 4K quality, time-stamped and GPS tagged, showing Patricia on my driveway yelling at officers. Audio clear enough to hear every word. Exhibit B3 property survey reports, county survey, TX-2024-9847, GPS coordinates accurate to 0.3 meters, proving my land was outside HOA jurisdiction. Exhibit C 911 call recording, time-stamped, demonstrating Patricia's false claim of emergency and misuse of emergency services. Exhibit D county records showing Alpine Ridge Development LLC zoning application and Cunningham Realty Holdings LLC registered agent Patricia Cunningham, establishing a $4.2 million profit motive. Exhibit E, cease and desist letter from my attorney, followed immediately by Patricia's HOA violation notice, proving deliberate escalation after legal warning. I backed everything up to the cloud and printed hard copies of every document. Then I did something I hadn't planned on doing. I started reaching out to neighbors. Not loudly, not publicly, just quiet conversations. One by one. I knocked on Jason Webb's door first. He was a 39-year-old engineer with 2 young kids. When he opened the door, he looked nervous, like he thought I was there to serve him papers. I introduced myself, told him I lived down the street, and asked if he had a few minutes to talk. We sat on his porch, and I explained what had happened with Patricia, the 911 call, the harassment, the development deal. Jason listened quietly. Then he went inside and came back with a folder. He handed it to me without a word. Inside were paint receipts, a professional color match report, and the fine notice stamped with the HOA seal, $1,200. I asked if I could make copies. He nodded. Before I left, Jason looked at me and said, "Is this really going to work? Can you actually stop her?" I didn't make promises I couldn't keep, but I told him the truth. I don't know yet, but I know this: she's not going to stop unless someone makes her, and I'm not going anywhere. Jason nodded slowly. Then he said something that stayed with me. I hope you win, because if you don't, the rest of us are screwed. I walked back to my house, Jason's folder under my arm, and I thought about what he had said. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every person Patricia had bullied, every family she had fined, every neighbor who had been too afraid to fight back, and I was going to make sure they got justice. One way or another. The pressure on Patricia built faster than I expected. Within a week of compiling the evidence package, word had spread through Alpine Ridge like wildfire. It started with Jason Webb, who mentioned it to his neighbor. Then Mrs. Dorothy Hale told 2 other families on her street. By the time the next HOA board meeting rolled around, 89 out of 114 households had heard some version of the story, and they were angry. The emergency general meeting was scheduled for May 14th at 7 p.m. in the Alpine Ridge Community Center. I arrived 15 minutes early with Michael Brennan, my attorney, and a folder containing every piece of evidence we had gathered. The room was packed. 89 households showed up, which was 78% attendance, the highest turnout in the subdivision's history. Patricia was already seated at the front table with the 2 remaining board members, Tom Hendricks and Sheila Rodriguez. She looked composed, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the edge of the table a little too tightly. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m. Her voice was steady, controlled. Good evening, everyone. I know there have been some misunderstandings recently. I want to clarify that all actions taken by the HOA board have been in the best interest of the community. Mr. Donovan has spread misinformation, and I hope tonight we can set the record straight. I stood up before she could continue. Mrs. Cunningham, I'd like to present evidence before you proceed. Patricia's jaw tightened. This is not your meeting, Mr. Donovan. Michael Brennan stood beside me. Under the Texas Property Code, homeowners have the right to speak at general meetings. Mr. Donovan has 10 minutes. Patricia couldn't refuse in front of 89 witnesses. She nodded curtly. Fine, 10 minutes. I walked to the front of the room, connected my laptop to the projector, and turned to face the crowd. I had rehearsed this moment a dozen times, but now that it was happening, I felt the weight of every person in that room watching me. I started with the basics. My name is Marcus Donovan. I live at 1847 Ridgemont Drive. On April 23rd, Patricia Cunningham called 911 and reported that I was parking illegally on HOA property. The police confirmed my property is outside the HOA jurisdiction. 2 days later, I received a harassment notice threatening fines and legal action. I clicked on the first slide. It was a county survey map, zoomed in to show the property boundaries. This is County Survey TX-2024-9847. My property was never platted into Alpine Ridge. The HOA has no legal authority over my land. I let that sink in for a moment. Next slide. A screenshot of the 911 call transcript. This is the public record of Mrs. Cunningham's call. She claimed an emergency when there was none. Under Texas law, that's misuse of emergency services. Someone in the back row gasped. I clicked again. The county filing for Alpine Ridge Development, LLC appeared, with Cunningham Realty Holdings highlighted in yellow. This zoning application was filed 3 months ago for a luxury townhome development. 118 units. The project requires 3 parcels of land, including mine and Mrs. Dorothy Hale's. I pointed to Mrs. Hale in the 3rd row. She nodded slowly. Patricia Cunningham is the registered agent for Cunningham Realty. If she pressures us into selling at below-market prices, she stands to profit $4.2 million. The room erupted. Chairs scraped. Someone shouted, "You've got to be kidding me." Tom Hendricks stood and turned to Patricia. "You never disclosed this. You never told the board you had a financial interest in this development." Patricia's voice cracked. "I don't have to disclose every business venture to you people." Sheila Rodriguez rose as well. "Yes, you do. That's a conflict of interest. Self-dealing. You've put this entire HOA at risk." I clicked to the final slide. It was the financial audit, the one I had requested under homeowner rights to review HOA finances. The numbers were stark. Over $120,000 in unaccounted expenditures, much of it tied to Cunningham Realty and personal legal fees. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. I turned to face Patricia. "You've been using HOA funds to pay for your personal expenses and funnel money into your own company. That's embezzlement." Patricia stood abruptly. her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "These accusations are absurd. I have documentation for everything." I didn't raise my voice. "Then show it, right now, in front of everyone." Patricia opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands were shaking. She looked at Tom and Sheila, but neither of them met her eyes. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" someone shouted. She didn't answer. She just pushed through the door and left, the sound of her heels echoing down the hallway. Tom turned to the crowd. "I move that we vote to remove Patricia Cunningham from the board immediately." Sheila seconded. The vote was unanimous. 86 in favor, 0 against, 3 abstentions. Then Tom proposed a second motion Patricia would reimburse the HOA $127,000 and face a formal financial audit. That vote passed as well. The meeting ended at 8:43 p.m. People filed out slowly, some stopping to shake my hand, others thanking me quietly. Mrs. Dorothy Hale approached me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You gave us our voices back." I walked out into the parking lot with Michael Brennan. The night air felt lighter, cooler than it had in weeks. Michael clapped me on the shoulder. "You did well in there." I nodded but didn't say much. Patricia Cunningham had just lost her position, her reputation, and her scheme. But this wasn't a victory lap. It was the necessary end to something that should never have begun. I got into my car and drove home. My Lamborghini Urus was still parked in the driveway, gleaming under the porch light, exactly where it had been the morning this all started. I stood there for a moment, looking at it. A month ago, I was just a guy who wanted to enjoy his retirement in peace. Now Alpine Ridge was quiet, and for the first time, that quiet felt earned. 2 months later, Alpine Ridge had changed, quietly, but completely. The new interim board was elected within a week of Patricia's removal. 5 members: Jason Webb as treasurer, Mrs. Dorothy Hale as community liaison, David Torres as president, Sarah Kim as secretary, and me as legal advisor on a volunteer basis. I didn't want to be president. I didn't want the spotlight, but I could help write the new bylaws, make sure the system worked the way it was supposed to. We held our first public meeting on June 1st at 7 p.m. 32 households showed up, which was still high by Alpine Ridge standards. David opened with a simple statement. "This board will operate transparently. Every decision will be public. Every dollar will be accounted for, and no one person will ever have unchecked power again." The room applauded. It felt like a collective exhale, like people were finally allowed to breathe. The new bylaws guaranteed transparency: open meetings, published financial reports, capped fines at $250 with an appeals process, board term limits, and mandatory conflict of interest disclosures. Rules that made power accountable. We also recovered the money. Patricia reimbursed the HOA $127,000 over 6 weeks. Most of it went back into the general fund, and $27,000 was divided among the 14 families who had been fined unfairly. I was offered reimbursement for legal fees, but donated it to the community park fund instead. The HOA balance was now transparent, audited quarterly, and accessible to anyone who asked. With the recovered funds, we launched 3 community projects. Mrs. Dorothy Hale led a community garden, planting rows of tulips in every color, and no one told her she couldn't. Jason Webb organized a neighborhood watch program in collaboration with Deputy Kowalski, focusing on real safety instead of control. And we started a legal aid clinic offering free consultations to homeowners about property rights and HOA issues. Patricia's legal consequences came down 3 weeks after the meeting. The Texas Attorney General's office opened an investigation based on the financial audit and my formal complaint. She wasn't arrested, but the damage was done. A plea deal for misuse of 911 resulted in fines and community service. She issued a public apology, brief and lawyer-drafted, published in the Alpine Ridge newsletter. I allowed personal financial interests to cloud my judgment. I abused the authority given to me by this community. I am sorry for the harm I caused. She lost her real estate license for 2 years, was fined by the state commission, and was banned from serving on any HOA board in Texas for 5 years. Alpine Ridge Development LLC withdrew its zoning application 2 weeks after the scandal broke. The project collapsed. One evening in late June, Mrs. Dorothy Hale invited me over for tea. We sat on her porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. She handed me a small watercolor painting she had done herself. It was my Lamborghini Urus, painted in bright yellow, sitting under a clear blue sky. "Mr. Donovan," she said softly, "you know, that car of yours saved me. Not because it's expensive, but because you were brave enough to defend it. You taught me I had the right to exist." I took the painting, my throat tight. "You always had that right, Mrs. Hale. You just needed someone to remind you." She smiled, her eyes wet. "Well, you reminded all of us." Jason Webb stopped by my house a few days later during a neighborhood barbecue we had started hosting monthly. He shook my hand and said, "I'm sorry I didn't stand up sooner. I was scared." I shook my head. "You don't need to apologize. The system was designed to scare people scared. Now the system's different." He nodded. "Thanks to you." I corrected him. "Thanks to us." One afternoon, I stood outside polishing my Lamborghini, a ritual I had returned to now that it didn't feel like an act of defiance. A kid, Jason's 7-year-old son, Tommy, ran over and stared at the car with wide eyes. "Mr. Donovan, your car is so shiny." I smiled. "You have to keep it clean. Otherwise, people might call 911. Tommy laughed, not understanding the joke. Then he asked, "Why did you buy a car like this?" I crouched down to his level, "Because I liked it. And nobody gets to tell me I can't like something just because they don't." Tommy nodded seriously. "That makes sense." I looked around. The air smelled of fresh soil and barbecue smoke. Mrs. Hale was watering her red tulips. David Torres was sketching plans for a new community center. Jason was playing catch with his kids. The late afternoon sun cast everything in warm gold light. The sun dipped low over Alpine Ridge. Mrs. Hale watered her tulips. Jason tossed a ball to his son. And for the first time, this place felt like home. 6 months after the meeting, Alpine Ridge held the grand opening ceremony for the new community center. It was a modest building. Nothing fancy, but it meant everything. Glass walls for transparency, an open meeting room for public gatherings, a community board displaying monthly financial reports, a kids area, a small garden space, and the legal aid desk I had funded. The center was scheduled to open at 10 a.m. on November 5th. Over 60 families showed up, which felt like a quiet victory in itself. David Torres asked me to say a few words at the ceremony. I refused 3 times, but Mrs. Dorothy Hale and Jason Webb insisted, and eventually I gave in. I walked up to the small podium they had set up outside the entrance, looked at the crowd, and started. 6 months ago, I just wanted to park my car on my own land. I didn't expect a 911 call or to be treated like a criminal, but Mrs. Hale lived in silence for 12 years. Jason paid $1,200 for the wrong shade of white because he was afraid. 14 families accepted abuse because they didn't know they had the right to fight back. I paused, looking at the faces in front of me. Justice isn't about who wins or loses. It's about the system. A system where ordinary people can trust it, access it, and use it without fear. This building is a symbol. Glass walls, transparent finances, doors that stay open, no shadows, no hidden agendas, no more Patricia Cunninghams. The crowd laughed and clapped. I stepped down, face flushed, and Mrs. Hale squeezed my hand. David unveiled a plaque at the entrance. It read, "Alpine Ridge Community Center, opened November 5th, 2025, dedicated to every resident who found their voice. Integrity is the only luxury power can't buy. Special thanks Marcus Donovan, Dorothy Hale, Jason Webb, and the 14 families who stood for justice." I stared at the plaque, my throat tight. Mrs. Hale whispered, "You gave us permission to be brave." I shook my head. "You always had that right." Later that afternoon, Mrs. Hale led me to the community garden behind the center. She had named it Dorothy's Tulip Corner, and it was full of flowers in every color imaginable: red, yellow, purple, and white, planted in neat rows around a small stone bench. "Last year, I was fined for red tulips," she said quietly. "This year, I planted every color, and no one can tell me I can't." I sat on the bench beside her, and we watched the breeze move through the flowers. "You deserved this freedom all along, Mrs. Hale." She smiled, her eyes bright. "So did you." As dusk settled, Jason's son Tommy ran up to me, tugging on my sleeve. "Mr. Donovan, can I sit in your car now?" I laughed. Sure, but you have to promise me something first. Tommy looked up at me, serious. What? I crouched down. When you grow up, if you see someone being treated unfairly, you speak up. Deal. Tommy nodded solemnly. Deal. I opened the Lamborghini's door and let him sit in the driver's seat. He gripped the steering wheel, eyes wide with wonder. Why did you buy this car? He asked. I smiled. Because I wanted to. And no one has the right to tell me I can't want something. Tommy nodded, like that made perfect sense. I stepped back and watched him pretend to drive, his small hands turning the wheel with absolute conviction. At that moment, more than anything else, I felt like the real victory. That evening, as families started heading home, I stood alone in front of the community center. The glass walls reflected the golden light of the setting sun, creating a glow that wrapped around the building. My Lamborghini Urus sat nearby, the yellow paint catching the last rays of light. I pulled out my phone and took a picture. The community center is glowing, the plaque near the door, the Lamborghini in the distance. I didn't post it anywhere, I just saved it. Because some victories aren't meant to be shouted, they're meant to be remembered. If you believe in standing your ground, in integrity over control, in justice that serves ordinary people, then support voices that shine a light on these fights. Channels like Karma Clause exist to remind us that systems can change when someone refuses to back down. Every time we stand up, we make it easier for the next person to do the same. The glass walls glowed gold as the sun set. The tulips swayed in the breeze. Mrs. Hale waved from her porch. Jason tossed a ball to his son in the yard. For the first time, Alpine Ridge was everything it was meant to be.